Thank you for coming. This is Family Wealth is what we're going to be talking about, is cherishing health and family wellness and health during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. My name is Danielle Jones. I work with Jewish Family Services under the Family Violence Unit, and I work in one of the transitional housing programs. I'm a licensed master of social work, and I've worked in a lot of situations with whether it's homelessness and domestic or substance abuse and mental health, kind of a little bit of the areas I've touched on. And then also I have with me here tonight.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elita Andrews. I am a licensed professional counselor here at Jewish Family Service as well. I am also in the Family Violence Department. I am funded under a grant by the Jewish Federation of Greater Dallas. That was actually created, my position was created in response to the tornado that we experienced. There's a lot of different types of trauma out there. One of the ones is a natural disaster. The tornado that we experienced this week, last year around this time. So part of my responsibilities are to provide individual counseling to people who have experienced trauma, as well as community outreach, information like this that Danielle and I put together to educate the community about different kinds of trauma and to inform about what's going on in our community.
So let's go ahead and get started. More about Jewish Family Services?
Oh, I'd be happy to. Jewish Family Service of Greater Dallas, here's our mission clearly, right? You can read that, and I'm going to read it later, but one of the best parts about it is right here, the open door to all in need. Danielle and I are both mental health professionals, and we are in the mental health department, which within the counseling clinician department, there's psychologists, there's social workers, there's counselors, there's so many different people who specialize in older adults and children. There's so many different, services that JFS provides. We use Jewish Family Service and JFS interchangeably, so you probably noticed that throughout the presentation. Additionally, the mission is to provide, while mental health is one aspect of what we can do for the community. Additionally, right here it identifies the social services that are available to the community. So I won't be able to speak about all of them, right? So we have over 150 programs and services here at JFS. So we want to make sure, I won't be able to capture all of them, but I'll be at the end of this presentation, I'll show the website as well as a number that you can call, our general number, to see if we can help you. We'd be happy, if we can't help you, we'd be happy to point you in the direction of what you're needing. Additionally, the social services, one of the biggest departments that we also have is career and financial services. We help people in increasing financial empowerment and independence, as well as their next steps in their career. Additionally, we also have a food pantry that runs every Thursday, and now with COVID, it's contactless and weekend opportunities. So there's a lot of different ways that we serve the community here at JFS. So today we're going to be focusing on a different part, and Danielle's about to talk about that.
Thank you, Elita. Yeah, so our outline, like I mentioned earlier, the title of this webinar is called Family Wealth. Quote, just a little pun for you. Really, like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about family wellness and health and what that looks like. We're going to touch on some points we're going to define what domestic violence is. It's not necessarily, it might be some information you've already had, especially if you've attended another webinar or been in any training about domestic violence. We'll just give a little bit of a highlight and a definition of what that is and what it looks like, and then we'll give you a little bit of statistics. Hopefully it won't bog you down with too much information. It is a lot, and some of the numbers are pretty staggering, but we're not going to leave it there. We will talk kind of like what's backing up those numbers, like not necessarily the resources we'll cite, don't worry, but also really talking about those risk factors. It's like, okay, why are these numbers so high? What is going on? And so we'll touch on some risk factors. One of the biggest ones we wanted to kind of address is with COVID-19. It's been a crazy year, as we all know, and basically every capacity. I don't know what aspect of life hasn't been influenced by this pandemic. And so we will touch on that a little bit, but really we want to land the plane talking about family wellness. And so signs or key factors of like what a healthy family or healthy relationship looks like, things to keep in mind. And this isn't so much like, oh, you fall short, you're not a healthy family or anything like that. Mainly it's really to kind of be an eye-opening experience of either celebrating it or really wanting to cherish healthy families and healthy relationships, but a lens to either have more grace for other people that might be in situations, you might be noticing things. If you kind of, I mean, we as social workers and clinicians, we're like, oh, we see it all the time, and it can be like so obvious to us. And so that's why we're doing this webinar, is because we really want to just saturate the community with resources and information that hopefully can be helpful, because this issue really anxiety in a much bigger way, and it's not as far as removed from us as we would like. It's very close to home, and so we really want to talk about it, but really in a positive way of the good things and things to hope for, and giving hopefully helpful tools of what a healthy family looks like and healthy relationships, and maybe some tips and tricks on how to prevent that and how to be aware of it is really the biggest thing we want to work on. So thank you for joining us. We're excited to have you. Oh, and then also I did want to mention, sorry, well, didn't want to steal the thunder from you, Elita. We will have an opportunity, since this is a pre-recorded webinar. We are going to be, we'll be live here when you're watching it, if you are watching it during the live premiere. And so if you do have any questions, anything throughout, anything that we're saying, anything like that, just know that your questions will be public, but we do provide our contact information later if you do have a more private question. But feel free, if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comment box, and me or Elita will be here to answer them for you.
Great point, Danielle. Yes, we'll be happy to be live with you on Facebook, YouTube, however you're watching this. We look forward to getting to know you virtually. And let me get to the next slide.
Defined. So what is domestic violence? So I'll go ahead and read it off the slide, but really it is any behavior, the purpose of which is to gain power and control over a spouse, partner, girl or boyfriend, or a family member. And this definition is key, is abuse is a learned behavior. It is not caused by anger, mental health problems, drug or alcohol, or other common excuses. So we will talk about risk factors, and it's a risk factor. It is not the cause of it, because if that were the case, every single person that has mental illness would be in a domestic violence relationship. Every single person that has alcohol or drug problems would be in a domestic violence relationship. That is not what it means. Just because if someone is experiencing risk factor, that they are for sure going to be in an abusive relationship. It just means that they're more at risk. It's the same thing as anyone that has like a physical health issue. If they have a genetic disposition towards it, or they have poor diet, it doesn't mean they're definitively going to have it, but it just means that they're more at risk. So.
Okay. And so with this, right, like what's important to show, right, we are here because of the Domestic Violence Awareness Month, right? So it's really important to, while it's easy for, I don't know about you, but sometimes whenever I see numbers, my eyes kind of glaze over, right? But with these numbers, it's really important, especially during Domestic Violence Awareness Month, to identify these statistics, right? So with this, as well as resources. So while we're looking at this, the idea of 1 in 3 women experience domestic violence, right? 1 in 4 men experience violence by a partner at some point in their life. With these, it's great it's on the positive end, there's 2 out of 3 women who perhaps have not experienced this. There's, 3 out of 4 men who have not experienced this. Additionally, it's important to just notice that these numbers are a picture of what's going on nationally. We want to start with the national statistics. And so these are beyond just numbers. These are people who are experiencing different types of violence. And domestic violence does not happen in a vacuum, right? So it's something to know that this is something, like Danielle pointed out, that it affects our community. Additionally, if we were looking at, it says 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men. And these statistics were provided by Futures Without Violence, which is a wonderful organization, a wonderful resource if you're looking to learn more about domestic violence and about that, what that looks like within a relationship. That's a wonderful resource. Additionally, today our purpose, like Danielle mentioned, is just to kind of provide an introduction to domestic violence. Perhaps this is information that you've already known, but it's also important to know that this is not all encompassing to what this looks like. So please feel free to encourage you to look at these resources to learn, to educate yourself more. And if you have any questions, we're obviously here, but this is an introduction to domestic violence as well as focusing on family wellness. And it's important to note that with these statistics, right, like these are 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men. That's the average, the national average. What's important to note is that statistics are people, this is people we've captured, right? So there may be people who are afraid to report. If we looked at these, as a way of breaking it down by race, ethnicity, ability, immigration status, LGBTQIA individuals, people who are non-binary. What would this look like? What would these numbers look like? So it's important to know, while these are the commonly referenced stats, it's important to know that this is still pervasive throughout our community nationally. Additionally, like I said, domestic violence does not happen in a vacuum. With these last 2 points, 1 in 5 tweens know a victim of dating violence. So if you think about kiddos who cousins, your children of your own who are in school, I think that there's a lot of kiddos. So 20% of kids happen to know a victim of dating violence, which is something that kind of shows that what Danielle mentioned earlier, which is abuse is a learned behavior. It's something that we can learn, and then we can replicate throughout different relationships unless it's stopped or unless it's acknowledged. And so it's important to know that. Additionally, 2 out of 3 children are exposed to this. So what's really important is to know that this can, whenever we think of trauma and violence, we can think of one picture of it, but it really encompasses a lot of different types of neglect, abuse, children who witness violence, witness any sort of violence or unhealthy conflict growing up. It can impact them later in life. So it's just important to know that these statistics, again, are numbers, but they show how pervasive domestic violence is within our community.
Elita, I like how you point out where you said, I'm glad you emphasized that, where it's the learned gear. It's just like, these numbers are so high. I mean, think about, I know 3 women. One of them is in, or will at some point if it hasn't already. And same thing, I know 4 men, one of them most likely. And it's like, for something that feels like that it could be, not feels like that is preventable, that could be preventable, that it's just, I mean, sweeping our nation, it is a quite staggering thing to think about, sobering.
Exactly. And staggering is such a good word. And like you said, sobering, because it's something that we all know people, right? We all know. And so we know friends, we know colleagues. So it's important to know that one of the other things that I did want to point out, so thank you for bringing this to my attention, Danielle, is that we wanted to make sure that you knew that we are talking about something that is very serious, right? And so if this is something, there's a chance that people who are listening could be experiencing this right now, or could know someone who is experiencing this. So I wanted to make sure, as a counselor, as mental health professionals, Danielle and I wanted to remind you that if this is too much, feel free to pause. Feel free to take this information in. You don't have to listen to it now. Know that you are not alone. These numbers show that you are not alone in experiencing this, or you or your friend are not alone, and there is help out here. There's help to assist you during this time. If you are wanting, and if you are, consenting for a conversation, help is available. So wanted to make sure that we pointed that out.
That's great, Elita. Thank you.
Yeah. Next, we kind of decided to go from Texas to Dallas, right? So we wanted to talk about what this looks like in our own state and our own home. So this, as you can see, we said 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men. You can see that it's a little bit higher in Texas. And this is based on the Texas Council on Family Violence. I'm going to do another plug for a great resource. They are a wonderful resource based out of Austin that provides advocacy, educational resources, webinars for people who are serving domestic violence victims, as well as people who are wanting to educate themselves, people who are looking out for help. Wonderful resource if you're looking to educate yourself, because again, this isn't a brief introduction to the dynamics of domestic violence relationship. But with that statistic, you can tell it's a little bit higher than the national statistics, 1 in 3, and then 1 in 4. And so that's something just to make aware of, as well as, is the statistic of all different types of relationships? Is this focusing only on heterosexual relationships? What would this look like for people who are transgender or non-binary? As we know, transgender women are really have a higher risk of experiencing violence. So it's just something to, again, whenever you see these numbers, yes, they're staggering and sobering. There's also people who may not be included in these numbers. Additionally, with the second one, this one I actually got wrong the first time, Danielle, whenever I read it. At first, I thought that it said over 15,000 family violence calls to the Dallas Police Department happened over 5 years, which I was like, oh, okay, 3,000 per year. But it's actually between June 2017 and May 2018.
The highest in 5 years. I see. Oh my goodness, that is even more. gosh.
Yes. So that's something, and another plug is for this 2018 Dallas County Domestic Violence Annual Report. Really great resource. It was actually funded by the City of Dallas Domestic Violence Task Force, which is headed by Councilmember Gates, for a Dallas City, a city council member. They were able to partner with UT Dallas to create this report to kind of give a snapshot in the community of what we are experiencing. So to give you a picture per month on average that people are experiencing for family violence that are attributed to domestic violence. So
that's just in Dallas.
Right. It doesn't encompass people in county, in like DeSoto, in Addison, in other Irving, and other places that experience this. So this is really staggering to know, again, Dallas is not immune. We are happening here, and this is why we're here to bring awareness to this important topic. And with Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we want to make sure that we are bringing awareness. Additionally, the DPD has seen an increase in domestic violence calls and reports over the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but it's impacted us in many ways. We don't really have the specific numbers, but this is a trend that the DPD has seen over this time. Additionally, within our own clinical departments, we shared yesterday in our clinical meeting, but there's been 130 requests for clinical services. And this is beyond domestic violence, right? This is people who are reaching out for services. So again, know that you're not alone. But also, this was as of yesterday. So this is not even the full month of October. There's people who are seeking out for help, and it's okay to ask for help here in Dallas. So we are here to serve. And additionally, you're not alone in experiencing this.
Okay, risk factors. We promised risks, and here they are. Now, I know it's not that exciting of a thing. It is a heavy topic, but we're kind of just setting the stage right now and getting into more of a hopeful stage. But right now, like really just, again, like we said, it's happening around us, and really want to acknowledge the risk factors. So here's just like a list of them. There are several, but these are kind of the top ones. Really the biggest one so far is an unemployment. And again, like Elita said, this is a learned behavior, which means not every single person that becomes unemployed is going to be in an abusive relationship or to be a perpetrator or a survivor. That's not what this means, but it does put you more at risk. It's a very, very stressful situation. It is grief, it's loss. It's just when people are in desperation and kind of can yield that. I think anyone that is watching this has experienced unemployment for any time in their life, that it does kind of give a perspective that you hadn't had before, that loss of what felt like security. And going in, same thing with strict gender roles. That is a big risk factor and Elita, did you want to say more about do you want me to just take over, or you want to go back and forth on the risk factors?
I think you're good. You're good. I can interject if I need to. Yeah.
Okay.
I think
sure.
And if I choose. Sorry.
Okay, perfect. So strict gender roles, what that means is like, this is how a woman acts, this is how a man acts, and really not keeping an open mind to that at all. Really just what might feel like controlling or restricting is a huge risk factor. Another one is a history of inflicting or witnessing domestic violence relationships. And we'll touch more on that a little bit later in talking about what's called intergenerational trauma. It's a lot of syllables, long word, really to say just what that is if you experienced it when you were younger, it makes you more at risk to then either be in that relationship, either as a perpetrator or a victim. And then again, you have children, and they see that, they have children and they see that. And so it doesn't mean it has to be, but it is a huge risk factor of people that have experienced trauma at a young age and can find themselves in a domestic violence relationship. Another one is isolation from friends and family. Of course, that is more true today because of COVID, and Elita will talk more about specific COVID risk factors, but really when you are isolated from your friends and your family and support and loved ones, that is definitely going to put you at risk for being in an unhealthy relationship, because healthy relationships do not limit your support system. It's in addition to, it's supplementary. You're kind of this interweb of relationships and connectedness. I mean, even as mental health professionals, one thing that we're looking for with depression or, someone's mental health and mental wellness is, are they isolating? Are they not? Do they not have social support? And so that's always going to be a risk factor because we're relational beings. We have to be around each other. We do not do well with too much alone time. I'm an introvert. I love being by myself. It's great. I think I'm great company, but I gotta spend time with people, and people have to spend time with other people. It's just how we were created. It's a huge part of being a human. And so whenever you're experiencing isolation from those relationships, it's really, really going to put you at risk to be in an unsafe situation. Another risk factor could be weapons in the home, guns, knives, things like that. Another one is stalking or monitoring a partner, is kind of that high sense of mistrust or controlling behavior is a major risk factor that no one should be stalked or followed. They should be trusted to be wherever they want to be. You are an adult, and even if you're not an adult, a child, an adolescent, a tween does not deserve to be followed and stalked. It's definitely a huge risk factor. And then the other one is structural racism. So that's a big topic. We won't get into the meat of that, but really there are a lot of systemic racism or structural racism. Those words are kind of interchangeable. So there's a lot of things in place that can perpetuate domestic violence relationships, things that are kind of in place that put other people in these situations, whether it's people of color or other minorities or immigrants, that they are in a situation where they have stricter rules, or they also are unemployed, and that there is isolation from other community members, like that there's systemic racism in place that can perpetuate that. And then the last one that we'll mention is attachment relationships. And so, Elita, actually, you want to take that one over?
Yeah, I can do that. So with attachment relationships, it's the idea of attachment, right? Which is, it's a theory, or not only counseling, but it's the idea of the relationship that you have with a primary caregiver up in childhood really dictates the kinds of relationships you have in the future, in adulthood, right? But also with other individuals, right? So like if someone is experiencing, it's kind of like you were talking about earlier, Danielle, like the idea of experiencing this as a child, experiencing violence or witnessing violence, having that normalized can really increase the likelihood of domestic violence relationship, or being a perpetrator of domestic violence. So it's something that really is again, it's that intergenerational impact of what people are experiencing. And attachment relationships, we could do a whole presentation on that, so we won't go too much into it, but at the same time they do kind of dictate the way that we navigate the world, the way that we navigate friendships, intimate partner relationships, our relationship with our parents. It's something that's really impactful. So it's really important to identify that if domestic violence is normalized, then it can be, again, like that cycle that's perpetuated. So that's really important. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you're right. Because I was wondering, I was like, is she talking about like the secured, ambivalent attachment? I won't get too many psychology terms, but really that attachment you form with your primary care young as an infant plays a role in the attachment that you form with other people. If you had a caregiver that was there consistently, you cried, they came, and they returned. If they dropped you off at daycare, they came back. That you had that consistency. You need to expect that relationship would be there, that it was stable, it was secure, it's consistent, and so it's easier for you to view. Whereas, and if you grew up with that attachment, that is fantastic. That's how we hope it to be for everybody. But really, there are people that had an inconsistent caregiver, whether it was they experienced trauma or abuse or something that happened that really kind of threw off not knowing what to expect from your primary caregiver at an age so young where you have no control. That really not that it's like for sure no matter what they're never going to have a healthy relationship. That's not what we're saying, but it will play a role in the relationships they decide to have in their life. And so if you do have someone in your life, you're like, why is he with her, why is she with him? And like I kind of wanting to have a little bit of grace of like, hey, all behavior makes sense in context. And so if you had the same set of experiences and the same set of people in your life, would you have made a decision any differently? And so kind of having grace and understanding in that as well.
Definitely. It's a great point. It's a great point. And with this, with that, we're kind of going to how these risk factors play within COVID, right? So
which is no one immune to risk factors at this point. We're all in COVID right now.
Exactly. And like even introverts are experiencing introverts like Danielle, and I am an extrovert, but sometimes like my introvert time. I think it's important to know that stressors have been the normal, right, in this COVID pandemic. So all the different factors that we find ourselves in, all the different things does not create domestic violence. However, I think it was Danielle who actually created this metaphor of COVID-19 and the pandemic could be a pressure cooker for what was already existing, right? So some of the resulting effects can amplify the risk and increase danger of someone who may be experiencing a domestic violence relationship, or it can increase in the violence can increase in nature during this time because we're all experiencing stressors, right? Not to justify any sort of violent behavior, but we are all experiencing stressors. So some people react to that in a violent way. Additionally, with the isolation, you're talking about this too, Danielle, right? Like the importance of social support, having those protective factors. It's a domestic violence relationships are about power and control. So if the partner's already isolated from their friends, a mandated isolation, which is important, shelter in place is important for public health and important for people's well-being. It can create a unsafe environment at home for people who may be experiencing violence in a relationship. And with risk factors, like Danielle emphasized so beautifully, it's the idea of if people experience this, does not mean that they are in a domestic violence relationship. It's that this can increase the risk of what people are experiencing, and want to make sure to highlight that, especially during this month. Another thing too is that the partner, an abusive partner, may be at home more often, especially if they're allowed to work from home. So that stalking, the monitoring of people's behavior, the monitoring of stalking what everyone's doing it can create a place at home where a little bit more tension, a little bit more on walking on eggshells, so to speak. So it's something to just be aware of, and we wanted to make sure we highlighted that as well. Additionally, financial stressors. That's something that's been experienced throughout the entire nation, right? One of the things that's really important is actually I was looking and I saw the unemployment in September for Texas was 8.3%, which is pretty high. In April, it was 13%. So financial stressors are already stressful enough. So if someone who is experiencing these financial stressors in a power and control relationship, it can be really detrimental. And like you said, it in itself, unemployment can be stressful. It can really compound those existing dynamics. And again, if you're working from home and you don't have childcare, you can't go bring your kids to grandma because you don't want to, she's social distancing. You want to be respectful of that. There's just a lot, and combined with financial stressors, it can just be a lot of different stressful situations. So COVID-19 is definitely something that's been impacting domestic violence relationships and all relationships in general. Additionally, if you have unsafe housing, if you're sheltering in place, great, but at the same time, if you don't feel safe in your own home, or if you don't feel safe in your own neighborhood, that can really disproportionately affect people, especially if they're people of color, people who have been historically marginalized or oppressed. It can really create, again, that pressure cooker for increasing violence in a relationship. Danielle pointed on this too, but the idea of social family support, not being able to reach out to your friend, or not being able to have that, someone called it physical distancing rather than social distancing, because there's different ways of interacting socially during this time in a healthy way. Again, it's that kind of combination of isolation. And if someone is kept from their partners or kept from their good friends, how are they going to be able to reach out and get that support that can help them during a stressful time? Additionally, one of the biggest things too is if you don't have a safe place in your own home, we're all doing telehealth right now. We're all performing counseling over online. So if someone doesn't have access to a car or to a private space in their home, if their partner to either report IPV, call a domestic violence hotline, call Jewish Family Service of Greater Dallas, it can be difficult. It can be increased barriers to report or to seek out help. So COVID-19 has just created this slew of increasing, domestic violence relationships, or increasing the pressure cooker, right? That pressure in domestic violence relationships. So it's important to just know.
Well said.
Thank you. Additionally, the power and control wheel. So this is like kind of the tail end of our domestic violence introduction. So we wanted to make sure to include this. This is actually based on this is adapted from the Texas Council of Family Violence, adapted this from the Duluth model. And it's in the domestic violence world, this is really commonly used as a way to show that, as you can see, domestic violence, like we have the picture of what it can be in our head, but it's beyond that. It's beyond physical violence. It's beyond sexual violence. There's a lot of different ways that people can use power and control in their relationships. So we wanted to make sure, you know, if you wanted to educate yourself on that, please feel free, right? Like we have, again, the Texas Council on Family Violence. We'll provide some other resources at the end. But this is something that can be, if someone's trying to learn more about themselves or about friendships, you know, relationship, or however, if they're wanting to educate themselves more, there are a lot of resources out there. One of the things to really emphasize is like the importance of consent when thinking about these relationships. So, you know, we were talking about gender roles earlier, right? So like in my heterosexual relationship as a cisgender woman, what if I was like, you know what, I'm going to clean the fridge, right? Like I will take that over, you know, I'll do a perhaps a more traditional gender role of a woman in the relationship. I'll take that responsibility. That's my consent. I am willingly doing that. If someone is forcing me, taking away my choice to do that, that's how male privilege or, you know, gender roles can really impact a relationship. So I wanted to make sure that just because it's all about the importance of consent and context within this power and control wheel. It doesn't really encompass what all domestic violence relationships looks like. There's also like, for example, if someone's experiencing, you know, someone's an immigrant or an undocumented immigrant, this can look completely different. There's a lot of different ways to exert power and control. So I wanted to make sure I address that before we transition from power and control relationships, talking about domestic violence relationships, into talking about equal relationships.
Oh, thanks, Elita. That was a lot of information. You did such a good job. I'm glad we're a little halfway through, just a little over halfway through with our presentation. And so we did talk about, kind of introduce ourselves, hello, and like a little bit more about JFS. We do lots of things, but really we do have a family violence unit. We do a lot of counseling, a lot of things really just to give back and serve the community. And one of those, and then we also were able to define or kind of shed some light on what domestic violence is. Elita gave a really, I love the visual between the two wheels, the power and control wheel versus this now equality wheel. And so now we're kind of switching gears to one part I'm pretty excited to talk about is we have a lot of great information. Elita did fantastic finding a lot of great resources and information and some good visuals to talk about equality and relationships and the generational trauma, things that might hit home. And so again, like just want to give that warning that Elita gave earlier, like, hey, it is a lot of information. It is a daunting topic. So please feel free to take a break, pause. Also, even if it's a lot of information, it's like, I can't read all of this. Go ahead and pause. And that's one of the perks of doing a pre-recorded one. We'll say this is our first pre-recorded webinar. And so we're excited to see how it's going so far. But I do think there is a positive aspect to be able to like kind of pause, take everything in, and look over the information a little bit. And so hopefully you're still with us. Very excited to still have you. So right now we'll be talking about the equality wheel. And so it looks very similar to the power and control one. And maybe basically its counterpart, completely opposite of really what an equal relationship like. And I won't go through all of the information, it is a lot, but just kind of looking over some of the titles of an equality relationship, meaning that both people have a stake in this relationship, both have a role, both are valuable and important and significant. There is no superiority or inferiority. There's no control over the other. It is equal. And so really there's a mutual respect. There is a space to negotiate and that it feels fair. It's a partnership. There is shared responsibility and there is equal responsibility across the board. And then also kind of the biggest thing you really want to look for in any intimate relationship, but even just a friendship, is that trust and that support. And so that you should find that in any relationship you're in. So I won't go over all of it, but just kind of wanted to touch on some points of what things are to keep in mind with thinking about equality within a relationship.
Right. And you pointed that out, Danielle, like the idea of like trust and support, right? Trust, support, and communication. Additionally, you know, like emphasizing that idea of consent, right? Like shared responsibility in household chores and parenting, just that consent and that a mutual agreement between two individuals, right? Like having that power and control a little bit more equal. So great point. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Oh, if I can. There we go.
Okay, and so this one is, oh, help me with the name. I know you said it earlier. I think you said it perfect. It's
Majora Tawab.
Okay, and she's a therapist relationship expert. And how did you find her? Are you following her or?
I definitely am. So I said we'd talk about resources, and here we are. We're promising it. I guess it goes to show again that you are not alone, right? And I'm so thankful that with social media that there's so many different, there's a lot of different pros and cons with using social media, definitely. At the same time, there's a lot of different therapists and experts who are experts in mental health and relationships, sharing a lot of information. So I wanted to make sure that we actually did screenshots from Instagram to make sure that that this is where we get our information. This is where you can learn more about dynamics. But yes, I found her by following her and listening to her on some podcasts. So she's a wonderful resource.
I love it. I know when I first read this list of like 11 signs of a healthy romantic relationship, I was like, this is great. I don't think I've quite heard. I mean, it's like, yes, I'm in a healthy relationship, but I've never quite heard it in this way. And so like even past relationships, I'm like, gosh, it wasn't that healthy. And like other people, I mean, it's not like it has to be a perfect relationship. It's just the healthiness. I think a couple of the things, I mean, you're able to read, I won't read off the entire slide, but really I think what struck me was is that you can respectfully disagree. I know that can be hard for anybody. Like, no, I'm right. And so really just, hey, just in a healthy relationship, it's okay to disagree and in a respectful way and speaking kindly to each other. I think the other thing is that your commitment is clear. Your commitment to one another is clear. I mean, like you said, with social media, and I won't get on my high horse on dating and things like that. And really the ghosting thing, people are like talking to each other and then they just ghost you or whatever. I know that's more like technology, things like that. But really when you have as much stake in this relationship as the other person does, and that your commitment to each other is clear, that there's not this sense of like ownership and that I'm responsible to you, but you're not responsible to me. That it's clear, it's defined, it's consistent, and it's equal. And the other thing is that your growth, I think is number 9. Yeah. Your growth is not a threat to the relationship. That's huge. I think that kind of touches a little bit on gender roles. I think sometimes like, if women make more or kind of break societal norms or, not doing traditional roles or vice versa, that if someone is growing or becoming more successful, that might be threatening to somebody else. And so that's not healthy. That's not fair, that you guys are partners, that if one is doing well, you're doing well together. If the other one's doing well, you're doing well together, and celebrating each other is really a key sign of a healthy relationship. And I mean, you wouldn't want to be with someone that's, oh man, you're doing like that because like that jealousy, and we'll talk a little bit more on that on another slide, of that jealousy, that insecurity, that power, that control. Those are warning signs and things to really, really look out for. So.
Yes. And you highlighted a great point too, Danielle, the idea of like looking back on relationships. Like sometimes, I feel like there's a common, since it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, I know we're focused on healthy relationships, but I think it's important to note that, there's this whole hashtag, speaking of social media, why she stays, right? And so I think that it's important to know that sometimes it's hard to identify if what you're experiencing is healthy or unhealthy, especially if it's not explicit, right? If it's not the more overt signs of violence, right? There's a lot of different ways to not, like looking back on relationships thinking, oh, wait, hold on. And if you're still in it, it's even harder to identify. So I think that like when you're talking about grace, exhibiting grace to people who may be experiencing it, it's hard to identify things whenever you're in it and you have that tunnel vision, or perhaps you're just, in a relationship. It's hard to know. So I wanted to make sure to emphasize that as well.
No, that's great. Thank you. Okay, and then the next one, generational patterns. This is really a topic that I found very fascinating, of like that intergenerational trauma. And so, because I mean, it almost feels like a family curse, and it feels like you can't get out of it. And it's just like working in this field, and even if you haven't worked in a social service field, you probably might know somebody, or you yourself are in a relationship where there has been domestic violence, and your parent experienced it, and your parents' parents experienced it, and you might be even now that your children are experiencing it. And so that's really not rare. We'd like it to be more rare. I hate how much it's happening, how prevalent it is, but it is a very common thing that there is this intergenerational trauma of like, it's a very difficult cycle to break, and there has to be something there to break it, because it will continue. And so really I love how she gives how to break that, like actual tools of how to address this intergenerational trauma and how to stop it in its tracks. That it's like, you know what, you can't stop what happened to you. You can't undo it. You can't make it go away, but you can figure out like you can work on who you are today and what do you want in your future? What do you want to do with those around you? How can you take this thing that was damaging and to make it into a life building thing? And so really knowing those risk factors, knowing where you've come from so you know where you want to go. And so a couple of things she touches on is, and so this is specific to parents, not everyone that's in an intimate partner violence has children, but this one's really specific to kiddos, is to encourage your kids to talk about their feelings. I know that seems really, really simple, but it's just a thing to just keep in mind that like feelings are okay. They're the most human thing any of us have, is we all have emotions, and that it's okay to talk about them. And so encourage that with your children, that there's no shame. It's not something to be guilty about, that it's completely normal and natural. The other thing is to apologize to your kids when you're wrong. And so I do not have kids right now, but that does seem like a really hard thing, especially if it's like you have like a 6-year-old that proved you wrong. You're like, whoa. Like,
hold on.
You're right. I'm sorry. I mean, I don't know that. I know, it's like, man, but I mean, what humility to display to your children of, hey, I made a mistake and I'm owning it. Like that's going to be huge for another person to be able to see that, hey, it's okay to make mistakes, and it's especially to them, and that it's not the worst thing in the world to have made a mistake, and that it's a good thing to apologize. And it kind of regains that self-control of like, yeah, I'm a human, I make mistakes, and normalizing it, that like, you're going to make mistakes too. And I hope you own it and apologize to others about it, that you don't just get into those behaviors of blaming and coercion and saying that it's other people's fault, that you really take responsibility for your actions. The other thing is allow your kids to see you being emotional and explain your feelings to them. I thought that was huge, because a lot of times you're like, you don't want to fight in front of the kids, and you really want to keep it together and just have this happy nuclear family. And it's like, that's not realistic, because they're going to get into a relationship and realize that they have emotions and their person has emotions, and nobody knows how to talk about them. And so it's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay to be emotional. And then also spending time with your kids with what they like, and then teach them healthy ways to deal with triggers. I think that is a big ask. Not a lot of people may know their kids' triggers and might not even know their own triggers.
Excuse me. Sorry.
And so, what did you do? No, I think that is a big ask, but I think it is something, once you kind of get to that point of like, hey, I was mad at my significant other because this is something that reminded me of what my father did or what my mother did. And they don't know that. They just got here. Even if you've been married or dating for several years, they do not know your entire childhood. They do not know every experience you've ever had. And so you could be reacting to them much more strongly, not because of what happened right then in that moment, but because it reminded you of something else that happened long ago. And so as you're raising children, that they may probably have triggers. And so acknowledge that. That does take a lot of self-awareness as an adult, as a parent, and then to be able to instruct your children in that. But that is a big thing to acknowledge, of like, whoa, that was an overreaction, or whoa, I got really defensive, I got really hurt. And that's the big thing about emotions, is it's their information. They give you information of like, whoa, that means something happened that I didn't like it. That's why I'm angry, because something happened I'm not happy with. Or when I'm happy, it's like something I like is happening. So like, view your emotions as a good thing, that they give you information, not that you need to let them control you and just follow, go with the ups and downs and ride this emotional roller coaster, but kind of pause and say, whoa, I'm really angry. Why am I angry? And give yourself space to have those emotions, but then figure out where really are those coming from. Was it just that thing, or was it from something that happened long ago? And so doing that also teaching that with your children.
Yes.
And then a couple more, because I know we have so many to go over. Let me see which ones I want to touch on. I think I do like the last one that she ended with, is be the person you wish you had and be the person that they need. I think that's any parent's goal and dream, is to be the mom or to be the dad that they wish they had during that time. And it's so funny. I remember thinking this when I was in middle school. I was like, because middle school is just kind of the armpit of life, and my body's changing and everything's weird and it's just terrible. And I was like, I just wish future me.
That's a powerful metaphor. Yes. Yes.
Oh, yeah. No, and I remember wishing, I was like, I wish future me would just tell me it's gonna be okay. And I would like I wish I could go to a little 11-year-old Danielle and be like, it gets better. The acne goes away. The braces come off. You get contacts. It's not the worst thing. And so really, you couldn't do that with yourself, but maybe being able to be that with your children, of like, hey, it's gonna be okay, and be that support and that consistent encouragement and love for them. So.
Right. That's a great point too. And it kind of goes into this next slide, right, of the idea of what maybe in our life, there's times where emotions were not necessarily like neglected, right? But like at the same time, they were not allowed to be expressed, right? So I think that there's something, to be powerful. Like I know that there's I see it a lot in my reality shows that I watch, reality TV shows that, it's like, oh, don't cry. It's okay. In that, right? Not to say that if you say that you are being violent with your words, right? When you're saying that, it's disregarding the emotions that they're experiencing, right? Saying, don't cry, don't be sad, it's okay, right? So it's immediately that disregard of that emotion that you're experiencing. So, I really do think that there's a lot of power with what Ms. Tawab brings up with this slide as well, or with this blog post. And by the way, we didn't include her captions, but she has wonderful captions. So please know that there are great experiences. Even if you're not on Instagram, she's also has a website and a blog so that you can go and experience that as well. Subtle plug for her. She's great. But they whenever I talked about that earlier, like the 2 out of 3 children experience domestic violence, right? Domestic violence and trauma. So there's something there that like it's not necessarily that it's not how we picture it, right? It can be emotional neglect. If someone's experiencing emotional neglect or that their emotions have been invalidated historically, that can, like with the attachment style, it could be something that you do now, you do as an adult, or you find yourself that subconscious and unconscious way of, invalidating your own emotions. So, she's saying here with this post, like if you've experienced emotional neglect, these are some, different ways of experiencing mantras within your life. Like there's something really powerful. I do this with myself, I do this with clients to make sure that you put words to what you're experiencing. If, your emotions are becoming overwhelming and, it's easy to just disregard them, right? And sometimes you have to. Sometimes, you have to like put them aside. At the same time, there's power in acknowledging what you're experiencing. So with this, I think that she's brought up a lot of great information of, identifying that you have the right to have emotions. You have the right to experience this, and kind of being that person, right, that you wanted to comfort yourself, right? To be able to be that person within yourself so it can help with relationships with your children, with friendships, with your significant other, like however it helps you with your dynamics within the world. So one of the things that I really like is the second one where she says, my needs are not too much. I don't know how many times you've heard that, Danielle, but my friends, clients, myself say, oh, I'm too needy. And, it's okay, that he doesn't text me back, I'm too needy, right? No, I mean, it's about that power, that communication between relationships, right? So your needs are not too much. Your needs and our emotions are valid. And if you want some more communication, there's important tools to be able to talk to your partner about that, right? So your needs are valid. So that's what's really great about some of these mantras. And, she kind of brings up something too. I was listening to a podcast with her in it, and she was talking about, she said that, sometimes in relationships, I don't know if you've ever encountered this, but, even with friendships, if you find yourself like taken aback by something someone says, right? You're like, oh, that hit home, like you were talking about, that hit home there a little bit. She mentioned that those wounds, even though it's happening in the current moment, they're not current wounds, they're deep wounds that can stem from childhood that we've experienced, right? Like the other day I was talking with a friend who doesn't like pickles or cucumbers, and as someone who needs to have minimum 2 cucumbers a day, that is something that was really upsetting. And I found myself feeling, upset. And this is like a frivolous example, right? Like it's not.
I was like, you're upset about the cucumbers, Elita?
I'm like, have you tried it with limes and salt? Have you tried it with other ways? There's a lot of ways to dress it up. Anyway, right? So like, this is something where it's like, okay, well, my needs, so I am strong, use my words. And, I also need to respect that if someone says they don't like cucumbers, don't force it on them, right? So like the idea of it's okay to feel what I need to, right? And I wanted to bring up a later example about my passion for cucumbers and pickles and everything. But these are different mantras, and I won't go too much into the rest of them, but like the idea of knowing that you are okay as you are, and emotions are telling you something about your body and about what you're experiencing, and it's important to listen to them. One of the ones that I will share is the one where it says, I am strong even when I'm vulnerable. So whenever I think of vulnerability, I think a lot of Dr. Brene Brown, a resident Texan as well, who's in the University of Houston. But It also reminds me of this quote that I think of, where it says, raise your voice even if it shakes. State what's on your mind, even if it feels scary, even if it feels new, even if it feels uncertain. It's easy. Sometimes it's easy, and sometimes automatically, to escape from emotions, escape from what we're feeling. So there's power in still feeling that strength, even whenever things are tough. So I wanted to make sure that these mantras are available if you wanted to explore those. I know we also promised you more resources. So here's another great resource, the Gottman Institute, which, if you haven't heard of them, they're wonderful. I put on here, the research-based approach to relationships, which does not really encompass all of they do. They're great, world-renowned individuals who provide a great service to the community. Excuse me. They train counselors. If you and your partner are looking for couples counseling, a lot of people look for Gottman trained therapists because they have evidence-based materials, and they're really great if you are looking for help. There's a lot of great people who are Gottman trained who are couples therapists, and there's a lot of people who aren't too. But this is just a great resource if you are looking for more internal resources, or more resources that you can have to help navigate relationships and to help navigate life. So with this, we're kind of talking about this, right, with the pickle cucumber debate. That flooded, again, a little dramatized, but that flooded feeling. I remember I was sitting in on a presentation about that, and I was like, wait, flooded? What does that mean? But it describes the physical feeling that you have whenever things are getting too much, right? So like conflict happens in a relationship. You stated that earlier. Conflict happens, right? There's healthy ways of having conflict, and there's ways of conflict that can be damaging. I know that some people have probably experienced this, that whenever they feel too overwhelmed, you can feel it in your body, physiological. So sometimes, you have those times where you're looking back on a conversation, you're like, oh, I said that out of anger. I reacted, I didn't acknowledge my emotions, and I said without thinking. I didn't mean what I said, right? So with this, Dr. Gottman actually emphasize the importance of, whenever you are flooded, make sure you recognize that. Like, even if you're having a heated conversation with a parent, with a partner, with a child, like acknowledging, hey, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. I need to get a breath of fresh air, right? I need to go for a walk. Just, respecting yourself and respecting what your body is telling you, and also realizing that it could cause more danger continuing this relationship, or not this relationship, excuse me, but this conversation. And so, go pet a cat, go express those feelings, but also acknowledge and honor what your body is feeling. And if your partner starts saying this, where they say, oh, I'm flooded, I need to stop, make sure you honor that. Honor those boundaries that they're asking. So these are different ways, I won't read them all, but there's different ways of, whenever I think of flooded, I think of like hot and flushed, and which is one of the ones at the bottom that they mentioned, like your heart rate speeds up, you're feeling that adrenaline pumping. Sometimes it can be the opposite. You can feel really like sped up, or you can feel really disengaged, like giving a silent treatment, or not really wanting to engage in this conversation anymore. There's power in awareness. There's power in recognizing what you're experiencing. And so it's really important, if you do feel flooded, sure that you explore those emotions and make sure that you recognize that, as to not impair the relationship further.
That's good. Okay, so kind of wrapping up, I know we're getting close to the end of our time. So this one is recovering during conflict, and it's a good transition from what Elita touched on with the flooding. And that's kind of when you yourself are feeling flooded, but it's also good to recognize that in someone else. If you're like, oh, I'm not fully emotionally invested in this conversation, but they are emotionally reacting, kind of be aware, notice that in the person. And so that is not the time to antagonize, not that it's your fault. And I mean, that never means you deserve respect or anything like that. But if you see that someone's having a difficult time managing their emotions, and they are you can say, hey, I think maybe even hopefully they know within themselves to have to be self-aware enough to say that. If not, kind of acknowledging that and being a good partner and saying, hey, maybe we can take a break on that. And that's kind of what this slide is talking about, is getting back on track during conflict. And so kind of that pause, rewind, repair. And so these are just kind of some helpful phrases to say if you are in the middle of a conflict, of either I just need to be calmer right now, or can I take that back? A lot of times, and hopefully we don't say things that we don't want to say, but it happens because we're human and we make mistakes, and we say things when we're angry, and to say things that we don't mean when we're angry. And so just asking like, hey, can I take that back? I'm sorry. And keep in mind that words have power, that they have control. And so really trying to measure your words, especially when you feel, like feeling yourself getting out of control and things like that. Another thing, some good phrases to say is, I need your support right now, or can we, or let me try again. Or a big one, it's a good one to deflate almost any tension, is I'm sorry. And like, I've wrestled with that of like, if you say I'm sorry, if you don't mean it yet, it's like, hey, like maybe I'm not even sorry for the thing that you're hurt about, but I am sorry that this conversation is like getting so escalated. Like at some point there might be something that you're just be willing to say I'm sorry, be kind of quick to apologize. That is super hard to do, especially when you're right. But no, I think really when you're just, it is difficult. I mean, you're dealing with broken people, be dealing with other broken people, and we're all just trying to figure it out, especially in a really high stress time with a lot of unknowns. And so really just trying to be quick to seek understanding and to try to hear from other people, and quick to apologize if you can. Another few phrases that she had mentioned is, I really messed up, I can see my part in this, which is hard. I know that takes a lot of ownership to say you were wrong, but it's huge for cultivating a healthy relationship. It's hard in the moment, but it's going to be great in the long run. Other things is, I want to say this more gently, but I don't know how. I thought that was a really good phrase to kind of just keep in your pocket of like, especially when you're like really angry, you're like, I know there's a better way to say this. I do not have the words right now, like, because I'm starting to flood. I can't think as kindly right now. So I think that's a good way to say, like, yeah, hey, I do not have the words right now, but I want to say this more gently. I just can't right now. And so kind of see if your partner gives you permission to go ahead and say it, like kind of unfiltered, or like, let's just table it. Wait till you're a little calmer before you say something. Another one is, I know this isn't your fault. Thank you for ... I understand. That's going to be huge. I think that's the biggest thing all of us are searching for, is to feel understood. And so when someone says, I understand, that really deflates a lot of tension and really kind of brings you back to this relationship where you feel like you're in a partnership. And then a good one is, I love you. It's a good one to always end on.
A good one to end and to have in your pocket, right? Like you said, to have there during conflict when things are heated. It's a great point.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so hopefully this did touch on, gave you some nuggets that were helpful, gave you a little bit of different perspective of what's going on. Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Again, of course, wanted you to be aware in some terms and some numbers that this is not that far removed from any of us, as much as we would like it to be. It is very real, it's very here, and it's happening all around us. And so really kind of figuring out, what is your role, what is your responsibility in this? And either it's trying to be self-aware, either to kind of see if you are in a healthy relationship, if you are a perpetrator or in a relationship that you don't feel safe in, that there is help. And there's the same thing for people that maybe it might be hard to identify like as a perpetrator, but you identified with some things as far as like, yeah, I do like the controlling and having the sense of power, or not yielding to any gender roles or things like that, that there is also support and help for you as well. And so, and even if this doesn't hit as close to home within your relationship, that it's not that far removed. It's 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men, at least at some point in their lifetime. And so really being that support and that encouragement for other people, and creating a safe space for people to be honest, and hopefully facilitating, encouraging healthy relationships in others. And so, yeah, we covered a lot of different topics of COVID and statistics and generational trauma and a lot of things. And I know it was very, very brief on each thing. It was not enough to cover everything, but hopefully, like I said, you did get some information that was helpful, or that someone can pass this along to that might benefit. What we have here is the references and resources, and Elita, the research extraordinaire, take it away.
Well, and these are the different, I already talked a lot about Ms. Tawab, Majora Tawab, and Gottman Institute. So again, those resources are there. They're wonderful. And the Texas Council on Family Violence also is one that I mentioned. We put a lot of ones on here that were resources that references that we cited, as well as resources. So we'll make sure these are available to you during this time if you're looking to educate yourself more. Like Danielle said, we cannot cover everything, but we wanted to make sure to bring awareness to this important topic. Additionally, with the, there's one down here with the Jewish Women International, the National Alliance to End Domestic Abuse. They provide a lot of great webinars, a lot of great information. So the information is out there if you are wanting to seek it. And again, we are here with any questions. We'll be responding throughout this webinar. And with that being said, I did say that I would show the number for JFS Dallas. And also, like I said, we have 150 services and programs to offer the community. So if you have any questions about it, the intake team is wonderful in being able to respond. That if we can't help, we'll find people who can and refer you to other opportunities. But please feel free to look at JFS Dallas and know that, again, that you are not alone in experiencing this. You know, I hate to say we're all in this together, but we are. We're a community here, and Dallas is not immune to any sort of you know, experiences that are going on. You know, we are all here to support you. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, or, you know, if you're wanting to learn more. We're here.